weeks. And so as long as we're able to do that, we're gonna keep doing it. Yeah, I'm Rob, tree fruit guy. I live here in Washington State, and yeah, had a good week. Finished up my vacation this week. Did a little fishing, caught a whole bunch of trout, and spent some time with some good friends. And spent some time on a boat out on the Columbia River, and still was able to make my way back to work toward the end of the week, and just in time to come into thinning. It's thinning time, and so that's kind of what's been on my mind. I wrote down a few things I wanted to talk to you about, just because things that are on my mind as we go into thinning. We've been talking about thinning for the last 6 weeks. We talked about blossom thinning, then we talked about petal fall thinning, going through that process. We talked about the millimeter sprays, and last time we talked, those were kind of working. And although there has been a real good drop in some cases, that drop is still taking place. So I just made a few notes. We started doing a little hand thinning last week, and I suspect by the end of this coming week, we're going to really begin to ramp up this hand thinning. It's really time to get in there and get that done. That's one of the most important things we're going to do all year with the crews anyway. Pruning, that's the most important thing. You have to start off with really good pruning and get that right. If you don't start off with a good pruning job, there's really nowhere to go from there. But shortly behind that is thinning. It's real important that you get that thinning right. I was just thinking about this today when I was mowing the lawn, and I wrote down a few things that I'm thinking about and that I've been reminding our team about, and that I just wanted to remind you about. The most important thing for me for thinning this time of the year is, and it's pretty broad, I know, but we want to put the thinners in a block that they have a chance to be successful in. We don't want to put them in any old block and doom them to failure right out of the gate. It's real important that we do our jobs as managers and leaders, and just backyard farmers, frankly, to get out there and have a plan in place for thinning before we go out there. So there's some factors in this that I just wanted to go over with you real quick. Again, number one, put the workers in a block where they have an opportunity to be successful. That's very important. Make sure the millimeter sprays are finished and are working. What do I mean by that? Well, if you sprayed your millimeter sprays 5 days ago, they haven't had a chance to do their thing yet. They haven't worked yet. You're going to see on a millimeter spray, you're a little later on in the cycle. So the deal with the calyx closing up, and that's all over with. You're going to be looking at the stem. The stem's going to start to turn red on you. That's going to be your first sign that apple's shutting down and it's dying. Beyond that, you can cut the apple open, take a knife and cut the apple open and look at the seed cavities. If those seeds have aborted in there, pretty good chance that's an apple that's going to fall. But the point that I want to make is if you're not sure, you don't want to put thinners in those blocks yet, because you don't want to go into a block and thin that block and then 5, 6, 7 days later have this continued massive drop and you end up with a lesser crop than you had hoped for because you put them in the wrong block to start with. Know your strategy. It's going to be different probably for every block. You're going to probably have a little different strategy. One of the things we like to say is biggest and best. So you want to leave the biggest and the best apple on the tree. So that involves a lot of things. You're going to probably want to remove all the junk. Anything, look for the lagus, look for hail damage, any sort of damage, and make sure that they remove those apples first. That's step one. And then beyond that, go to the points that you're looking for. Remove the junk. Do you want to leave doubles? It's really important to know what your bud count is right down here. Know what your bud count is. Know what you're expecting for a crop from that block and how many buds it's going to take to get it done. And then you can begin to draw out your tree and see how many apples you're going to end up with on that tree. And if you're not going to get it done, if you're not going to reach your goal and your objective realistically, maybe you need to think about setting doubles on those trees. We'll do that in blocks every year. If you get a block that's a little lighter, you want to make sure you have a full crop. So it could be that you want to leave doubles. So have a plan. Know what it is that you're going to do. Just a piece of advice, if you have organic and conventional blocks, you can always start in organic blocks first. There are no petal fall sprays. There are no millimeter sprays in organic blocks. So you know that whatever you've done on the lime sulfur sprays on the block, that's already finished. That's already over with. It's done its thing. That's already played out. What's set on the tree is what's set on the tree. So it's a safe bet to go into organic blocks and start thinning those right out of the gate. That's usually a good place to start. Bud count, we talked about that. Duration of harvest, that's a very important question to ask yourself. If you struggle with size on galas, and galas are one of the first apples that you're going to pick in the year, that means your window to get that apple grown and the right size is a lot shorter than some of these other varieties. So you want to consider that. I personally like to get out there and thin the galas first, because sometimes if you set a big 90, 100 bin per acre crop of galas, they want to be a little on the smaller side, 110s, 100s. we want a really good 88, 80s on Galas. So maybe we'll want to get into the Galas and thin the Galas first. There's a lot of questions in mind. Hey, Jared's on board. Nice to have you, Jared. There's a lot of questions we want to be able to ask ourselves when we're making these decisions on what blocks that we're going to thin. You know, what's the window to harvest? Stems or no stems? Sometimes on our Honeycrisp will tend to have a long stem, and if you pop the apple off like you normally do on thinning, you'll end up with this long pointed stem that has a tendency over the course of the year to put puncture holes in apples. So sometimes if we can get into a Honeycrisp block earlier, we like to do that because we can actually pick the apple off stem and all. Most cases you're going to be popping the apple off the stem. That's not an issue, but you want to decide that before you get into a block. You want to make those decisions, and if it is that you want to pick the whole apple for one reason or another, Tiffany's on YouTube. Welcome, Tiffany. It's nice to have you. Helen Skursky is on board. Thank you. Good to have you on board tonight. So you want to decide stems or no stems. What variety is it? Some apples are easier than others. I've just been marveling over Cosmic Crisp the last few days as I'm looking at the thinning on the other apples. Cosmic Crisp, we don't do any thinners on Cosmic Crisp. They're like a naturally thinning apple. Sprays, we don't do pedal fall sprays, and it's one of the last apples that will hand thin. It's just a marvel to watch that apple just through nature, the nature of that apple self-thin. It'll self-thin during the flower period. Sometimes can be even a little hard to set. But even now, you know, following fall, those apples are starting to get a little size, and you go out there and they're just systematically thinning themselves, and they'll have a pretty good June drop. So you want to ask yourself, what is the apple? Will it have a June drop? If you know, what's the history of that block? You want to answer all of those questions. Are there areas with heavy fruit load in the treetops? One of the things I always like to do, especially on a short day or something like that, where I'm just looking for a place to put some crews for the last couple hours of the day, I always like to look at the crop load in the tops of the trees. Usually when we're doing the pedal fall sprays and the millimeter sprays, we're pointing the nozzles up at the top of the trees because by then, that's where the bulk of the fruit load is. And if you haven't got that evened out, in other words, if you still have a massively heavy crop, doubles and triples up in the top of the trees, it could be that you want to get in some of those blocks first and get those out of there because the bigger those apples grow up at the tops, the more damage you're going to do having those apples fall to the ground and hit other apples on the way down, ladder damage, that sort of thing. So if you have some real heavy tops, it could be that you want to get in there pretty quickly. We like to do that with platforms. Those are good scenarios to get in with platforms, autonomous platforms, and get some of those tops knocked out. So what else do we have here that I wanted to talk about tonight? Just real quick, I wanted to give a fire blight update. Mark Lamb's on board. Hi, Mark. Yeah, I'm getting to know Mark a little bit. It's nice to have you on board. Atif Assad and oh boy, how are you? Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you very much. It's nice to have you on board. Fire blight update. You know, we're out of that bloom period. We're out of that real dangerous period for fire blight, but we're not out of the woods. Fact is, we got checked a little bit this week. We've finding just a little bit of fire blight, but we've had a lot of wind and rain and good temperatures for fire blight. So we're in a fire blight period. And sometimes we get these massive windstorms that tear up leaves and break spurs. That's a perfect scenario for fire blight. So it's real important that if you've had that happen to you, that you get out there with that streptomycin and you get those treated. I wouldn't even mess with it. I would do it. I know I always try to make the case that I only do one streptomycin per year. You know, on label, you can do more streptomycins per year. We just, you know, we don't want to hurt ourselves. Streptomycin or any antibiotic, you don't want to overuse it because the plant will develop resistance to it. And we don't want to develop resistance. But if you've had an incident like heavy wind damage or hail and it's an emergency situation, I wouldn't hesitate to do another streptomycin or even a third streptomycin. Wouldn't get in the habit of doing that. But if it's an emergency scenario like that, I wouldn't be afraid to do that. Late bloom can be an issue, and also shoot blight this time of the year. We're growing those trees really hard. You know, some of those trees are growing 3-4 inches a day right now. You can just almost see them growing. So that real fleshy tissue and those shoots that it's growing, if you get wetness and the right temperature, if you get the right conditions for fire blight, you can sure get it. So just a reminder, those non-bearing trees that you're really trying to grow hard and you're pushing hard, I'd stay on those with a pound of copper a week. Every single 7 days, I would stay on that and do that until the end of the growing period. And also, just a warning about be careful about thinning or training trees during or just ahead of a fire blight event. We went out, it's been 2 or 3 years ago. We went into a couple pink lady blocks and we're tying limbs down and taping it with the electrical tape like I showed you. And we did 20 acres like that, and probably lost 7 of those 20 acres because as we were taping those limbs down, we broke off spurs where the tape was, and the next day we got a rainstorm that got in there, and we got fire blight in those trees that just almost lost both of those 10-acre blocks. But we did lose a considerable amount of trees. Had to go back in there and graft and rebud the trees. It's just an absolute nightmare. So just a word of caution. Just be careful about it in those real fire blight sensitive blocks, about training or even thinning those blocks if you're in a fire blight condition. That's all I really have. Maybe codling moth. I'll just mention the codling moth real quick. I know here in Washington, I would suspect other places as well. Hi, Brett. It's nice to have you on board tonight. There's a lot of unfarmed acres out there this year. You know, there's been a lot of blocks that are not being farmed. There's been a lot of blocks that have been pushed out, and those blocks really have a potential for codling moth and being host to codling moth larvae. We've seen some phenomenal trap counts here in the Pacific Northwest this year. So just a word of caution about that. Be aware of that. Be aware of what's going on in your neighbors. We've had neighbors' fields before where they pulled out apple trees and they dissed them under, and 6 months later the little suckers come up and start producing little flowers. Perfect scenario to get codling moth in. Those things will travel a long way. So just some things to be aware about as we come into fire blight codling moth season. So that's all I really had on that tonight. We're going to go ahead and turn our attention to your questions. We had quite a few questions this week. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Anil Chandel said, sir, this year in India, we faced no cherry produced. Had a lot of flowers and fruit set, but the fruit didn't turn into fruits. It dropped off. Can you please explain why this happened and what? I don't know why it happened, but I have some questions and maybe some ideas of maybe why it happened. You know, my first question is, do you have pollinizers, right? I always stress that. Do you have pollinizers? Cherries, I like to plant those at 4%. So for every cherry tree you want to have 4 pollinizers spiked in there. That's pretty important. Make sure you have pollinizer trees. You need those. Do you have bees? What's your source of bees? What's your source of moving that pollen around in the block? Do you have bees? Are you able to rent bees? Are you able to buy pollen maybe? You know, it's real important that those trees are fertilized. So I would examine how it is that I'm getting those trees pollinated. Make sure I have everything in place to make sure I'm successful with that. The other question, the final question that I really have for you is, what was the weather during bloom time? You know, if the temperatures are below 50 degrees, sometimes the pollen won't move down the tube and they simply won't pollinize. If the wind's blowing, the bees and the hosts that are moving pollen, they won't work. They won't come out and work. So you know, if it's too hot, it'll dry out that pollen. We've seen that where you get a high wind and it's hot, and it'll just dry out that pollen right in the pollen tube. Won't make it down the pistil. So those are some of the questions I have. I suspect it's probably one of those things. It's probably weather related or somehow pollinizer or pollen. Were the trees pollinized? Those are some of the questions that I would have. If you can answer some of those, maybe we can dive back into that a little bit. Roni RC says, what about June? I think she's probably talking about thinning here. We've been talking about thinning all. Oh, yes, she is. Isn't it too risky to thin before that time? What about June? Isn't it too risky to thin before that time? It can be risky to thin before that time. And I suppose if I were a backyard grower and I didn't have to, no, I take that back. I want to thin early. I always want to thin early. So it just so happens that we do the bulk of our thinning in June. But we're second week into May right now, and I'm doing everything that I can to get crews out there, mainly because number one, we've got a lot of ground to cover and not a lot of time to get it covered. We're coming into cherry harvest here in 2 weeks. So it could depend on your workload that kind of causes you to get out there earlier, even though it costs a little more. Maybe you got a lot of ground to cover or you know, could be your employees. You got to keep your people coming from pruning right into thinning. For me, I really like to do it because I want a good bloom next year. So the earlier I can get that fruit off, the better. So no, I don't think it's risky to thin before that time. I think as long as you consider all those things, I think you can be very successful thinning in May. As soon as you can get out there, as soon as you do those things, put them in a place where they can be successful. Larry Banakachawiski Banichowski. There we go. Let's try that. An order to the operation of thinning would be great. Something like a walk around where you remove fruit from the underside of branches. Yeah, I read this a little while ago. I won't read the whole paragraph here. What Larry's really asking for is a video like some of the pruning tutorials that we've done, but on thinning. And so I'm going to talk to my videographer, my wife Marlon over here, and we're going to see if we can get out this week and do some actual thinning and get up there in there with the camera and show you how to pop that fruit off and show you what we're leaving and show you what the spacing is. And thank you, Larry. I think it's a great idea. I'll talk to Marlon. We'll get out there and make a video this week for you. Myriad. The best time to deal with overvigorous trees, girdling and scoring. I would say late winter to early spring. The best time, the ideal time is probably full bloom. But if you had to do it before that or a little after that, it would be fine. I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take it to the end of May probably. But by the time you get to June, you're going to have a tendency to be more and more de-invigorating. So I think as long as you do it around that full bloom time period, plus or minus 2 weeks, one way or the other, I think you're going to be fine. Nazir Ui Islam. In facing organic cherry pests such as aphids and Drosophila, do you use drone in spraying them? If not, why? We do not. We do use drone. I posted a video this week of us using a drone to release sterile codling moths. We did some of that in a couple locations this week. We've also used drones to release lacewings and some of the beetles that Kyle Rash was talking about a couple weeks ago. He sent me the name. We've released some of those. We've released a lot of ladybugs. That's real common for us this time of the year. We haven't used drones to spray. Why not? The reason is spray volume. When I'm going after pests, I want to have as much spray volume as I could get. I'd love to spray everything at 200 gallons per acre, but the amount of acres that we have to get across, that's just not practical. So I really want to spray everything at 100 gallons per acre when I'm going after a pest, so that I really get down in that bark and I really make contact and I get those things. So the case for drones, the big issue is spray volume. Even the big drones just have maybe a little 20-gallon tank on them, and in a large commercial setting, that wouldn't get us very far. But there is a place for them, and they do a great job when it comes to releasing predators. We've done all kinds of things, mapping blocks, and we're working with someone over at WSU right now, talking about being able to take a drone up in the air and do fruit counts and look at color and all sorts of things that you can do with the drone, but just really hasn't become practical for us yet for spraying. Vija Verma, nice to have you on board tonight. Welcome. Jim and Marcia Uber on sterile codling moth. Are they available for home growers? I can't find a source. I really doubt it. This is probably Jim, right? Isn't it Jim that normally says, yeah, this is probably Jim. Hi, Jim. It's nice to have you on board tonight. I doubt if they're available for home growers. I know that we have to order these like a year ahead of time. I think they come out of Penticton, Canada. And some years, this year, they've had problems, for one reason or another, not being able to raise as much as they wanted to. They are a little bit hard to get your hands on, but I would talk to your chemical company if you deal with the Wilbur Ellis or GS Long or whoever your chemical company is. That would be the person to talk to about sourcing those. But I bet if you're just a backyard grower, it would be very hard to get your hands on those, and they would just be they're really expensive. So hope that helps. Mark Lamb. Mark just joined us, right? I could ask, how in the world did the sterile moth population go up? Oh, yeah. It didn't go up. Yeah, that's a very fair question, Mark. Yeah. When I said that I was looking at the trap counts and the sterile count, yeah, I believe that what you're referring to is when I was talking about the counts, I said that I was watching the sterile moth counts come up and the normal moth counts were going down. And that's true because initially there were zero sterile modeling moth counts. We didn't have any. So when they were high, and after 2 or 3 weeks, even putting them out in the field and building that population, they were even higher than the non-sterile codling moths. But the population did not grow. That's a fair question. Yes, of course, it didn't grow. They're not able to breed. The only reason the population was growing in the traps on the sterile counts is we release those every week. We're trying to build a population of those out there and attack this this first and second hatch. In Washington State, we've even had sometimes a third hatch later in August on codling moth. So we're really trying to target the peak of those hatches. So of course we're going to see those counts go up. I hope that makes sense. But you're right. That's good. Thanks for calling me out on that. They certainly weren't increasing in population, I think is your question. Buyakub Younes, on dealing with overvigorous trees, would summer pruning reduce vigor in overvigorous trees? Hey, this is a great question. We've been talking about reducing vigor. Kyle talked about the root pruner last week. Thanks for bringing that up. That was really good. But yeah, one of the things that we haven't talked about that's a real important component is this right here, summer pruning. Summer pruning reduces vigor. Sometimes when I have a block that tends to alternate, that has a lot of suckers or whatever, instead of going in there now in the dormant season where every time you cut a sucker, you're going to get 6 more and you're going to invigorate the tree. You're going to wind it up even more. Sometimes the best solution is to wait till you get a little closer to summer solstice or the summertime, right? If you get out later to the middle of July in our area, those will become de-invigorating cuts. They'll have a tendency to take the vigor out of those trees. We use that principle strategically for a lot of different reasons. So I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for that. It's a great strategy. Anil Shandell on Lygus insect. It's becoming familiar in India too for the past 2 years. We did insecticide at petal fall. Should we practice doing insecticides during bloom? If yes, then which one so that no bees are harmed and the flowering is unaffected? Boy, I'm hesitant to really comment on that. I'll say this. I'll say a couple of things. If it's available to you and it's on label, then I would say yes, do it. But you have to be really careful. You know, we're really aware of what would be harmful to bees and what's not, and we stay strictly to the label. And there's some products that we can use. It's just recommended that you spray them at night or that the bees are removed. So we're careful to do all of those things. Fact is, we don't spray any pesticides until we get the bees out of the field because we love our bee populations. In fact, we plant pollinator beds at the base of our orchards because we want to protect those. Those are very important piece of what it is that we're doing. Follow the label. Try to use lime sulfur in oils. Those are helpful. Those don't hurt bees. If there are other methods, I would do that. You know, there's always Entrust, but it has the negative effect of killing predator populations, and you might end up with a mite flare up. So that's a really good question. I would talk to your field man. You know, I'm not the greatest entomologist in the world. I have kind of a working knowledge of it, but if it was me, I'd be asking my field man the same question. So I'd be careful about adding additional insecticides during that bloom time period when bees are foraging out in the field. Saqlain Mushtaq. On the nutrition for trees on their first year, tell me what is the most optimal method of nutrition, drenching or foliar method, or the combination of both? Yeah, that's a good question. What is the best method for getting the fertilizer on? Number one, the dry. That's the most important mix for me. I want to get all the N, P, the K, the sulfur, you know, as much calcium as I can. I want to get that in the big dry fertilizer that goes down late spring, late winter, early spring. We just finished those mixes. But then the next big one is fertigation. I love fertigation. I'm a fertigation guy. I use that for the gas pedal, for growing trees up and really getting trees to grow. If I have a weak block that I just want to set a little foliage on, I'll give a little fertigation to that. Or this time of year, if I have a cherry block that's looking a little weak, you know, big cherries, big leaves. That's the way that goes. You want to have big leaves. So I might give a fertigation shot to cherries. But listen, you're right. It's all of the above. Fertigation, foliar sprays, dry mix, compost, foliars, all of the above. I would do all of the above. The big guns, though, is the dry mix and the fertigation. And you mentioned drenches. I would do drenches. You can put a liquid fertilizer in your herbicide sprayer and band it on the row, and then turn the sprinklers on and move that in, just as if you were doing a fertigation. It's very effective. So yes, you can do all of the above, and I do, and I would. So, good question. Warren Pally, on black pearl cherry, do they need a pollinizer? Do they need a pollinator? Yes, they do need a pollinizer. They would have to have a pollinizer. I like to have a lot of pollinizers in those. You know, maybe as much as even 8%. I like to do 4% Lapins and 4% Sweethearts, but it really depends on what pollinizer you want to use, depending upon your area. There's 6 or 7 pollinizers that kind of come to mind. We use Lapins and Sweethearts. Black Pearl Cherry, though, yes, it does need a pollinator. Susan Lee, my 3 apple trees have a fungus, I think. They start out good each year and have good blossoms, and the leaves start to fall off, starting with the lowest branches first. If I spray after blossoms fall every couple of weeks with a fungicide, I can save most of the leaves. Is there a permanent way to get rid of the problem? Well, I want to be able to help, but I'm not sure. My first question is, what kind of fungus is it? Is it a root fungus? Is it Phytophthora? Kind of sounds like it could be Phytophthora. So that'd be my first question. Is it a root fungus? Also curious what your rootstock is. If you happen to know that, what the rootstock is in your tree, that would be helpful to know, because some rootstocks like M111, M106, even 26 to some degree, can be very susceptible to Phytophthora. You don't want to get those in real wet soils where they're going to have wet feet. Wet feet, since I brought that up. You know, a lot of these funguses come as a result of wet feet. So if you can pull back the irrigation somehow by not applying irrigation, I don't know if you're in a clay environment, but I will say this, that Phytophthora really comes along as a component to wet feet. Trees don't necessarily like to have too much water. I always say we like to hold the soil moisture capacity at 80%. We've talked about that a little bit, but when you start getting in that 90, 95, 100% zone, trees don't like that, and fungus is set in. What can you do? There's some products out there. Linebacker is a product right offhand. Ridamil is a product that will treat Phytophthora or root funguses, if that's what you have. I would get those samples. You can get those sampled at the local extension agency. Probably be able to help you with that. But get it sampled. If it's a root fungus, there are products out there, Linebacker and Ridamil, that you can take a look at. Nick Williams, what do you do when your pear trees just end up with tons of water sprouts from those horizontal branches right now versus in the spring? Hey, that's a great question. Brought back some memories for me. When I was a kid, one of the things that my dad had us do is those pear trees every year, you're right, they want to send off all those suckers up inside of the tree, all those water sprouts, and they grow up about that long and they're green and fleshy. And one of the jobs that me and my brothers had when we were younger was sometime before those turn woody, because once they harden off and become woody, then it becomes a pruner job. But as long as they kind of grow out and do their thing and they're still real fleshy, you can climb up inside of that tree and just yank those things out there with your hands. You can go up the backside of the limbs of a pear tree in just 2 minutes pulling those out of the trees. It's called desuckering the tree. So if I was you, that's what I would do. I would just get in there and just pull those out of there, and it's a lot cheaper to do that during this timing. Great question, and I would certainly do that. Yeah, follow up here. Follow-up question on variety. What is M9? M9's a rootstock. I think that's of the 337 class. I'm not real sure. Real popular rootstock. We planted a lot of it over the years. Kind of moving away from it now. Not because it's not a good rootstock. It is a good rootstock. Just because we're moving toward rootstocks that have a little resistance to fire blight. But M9 is a great rootstock series. Saklan Mushtaq is on board. Welcome. It's nice to have you on board. Muktesh Thakur, what is your favorite rootstock? My favorite rootstock? Well, that's a loaded question. Real simple and real easy. Geneva rootstocks are my favorite. I just mentioned that. I like Geneva rootstocks on apples. On cherries, I like Gisela rootstocks. On cherries, I like Gisela 6 and I like Gisela 12. Not a big fan of Gisela 5, but I like Gisela 6 and Gisela 12. Those are great rootstocks. On apples, my favorite rootstock is the right rootstock for your soil and your place. In the desert down here south of Kennewick, on a ranch on the river that has a very sandy, loamy soil, I love Geneva 41. That's my favorite rootstock down there. I absolutely love it, and I would plant Geneva 41. But if I was up in West Valley in Yakima in a little more clay soil, and it's a lot harder to get that tree to grow, and I don't have the growing degree days that I have up there. My favorite tree up there is probably going to be a Geneva 890 or a 969 because I need a little more horsepower. Now, if it was a perfect world, then I had the perfect soil and I had the perfect fertigation and I had all the money in the world and I could plant trees about a foot apart. my favorite rootstock would be a Bud 9 because I can plant them close and I can get into production. You know, in the second year, by the third year, I'd be in full production, and I probably only have to set 30 or 40 apples per tree. That would just be the most perfect scenario. So I hope I'm making my point. I have a lot of favorite rootstocks. There's a lot of good rootstocks. The key is pairing the right rootstock to the right climate and the right soil. That is so important, and that's why we have a whole host of rootstocks. Rootstock that works 30 miles from here might absolutely not work. Just down the road in a different soil and a different environment, it might not be the right rootstock for that ranch. So it really there's a lot of factors that play into that. But generally speaking, I love Geneva rootstocks and apples. I love Isla rootstocks and cherries. So Ross says, hello there. I hope you're doing great. A straight question. I want to focus on the leader for the next 2 years. Current age of the plant is 2 years. So is it good? If yes, how do we make a strong leader? That's a great question. The most important aspect of training is the central leader. Absolutely. The most important thing is to, especially in a commercial setting, but even here in my backyard, is to channel growth and prune that plant in such a way that you drive that central leader to the top of the tree. If at any point you overcrop that tree too early and you stop that central leader from growing and the tree spurs up, chances are you will never get that tree to the top wire. Never, ever, ever. So you have a great question, and the answer is the central leader absolutely should be the priority. Getting that thing to the top wire, because once it reaches the top wire, typically we'll grow those about 18 inches past the top wire, and then we'll fill out those branching. But as soon as you get that driven past the top wire, you'll naturally fill out the space on your branches if you can pull that off. So absolutely, when we're training trees, fact is when we plant trees, a day or 2 or 3 days after we plant those, we go to every single tree and we run a string all the way from that tree to the top wire, and we tape that tree to that. And then every week or 2 during the growing season, we go back in there and we retape that all the way up that. Because if that leader even moves in the wind just a little bit, it will shut that tree down and it'll stop growing. So keeping that anchored to that string all the way up that thing. Don't keep your eyes off of it. That thing grows 6, 7, 8 inches without having a piece of tape on it. You should be out there getting a piece of tape on that so that it's never blowing around in the wind. So great question. I hope I didn't over answer that. Absolutely. That should be the priority of training, is the central leader. Sometimes when we're doing training passes and we don't have time to do a training pass, I'll send them out there and I'll say, just tie up the leader, because that's the most important thing. Karen Castro says, I've never heard of coral champagne cherries. What zones can you grow them in? I'm not real familiar with the zones. I've looked at some of the backyard pages, and I know there are zones in Washington State. I'm just not real familiar with them. I certainly know we can grow them over here on the east side of the state, no problem. But it really comes out of California. Coral champagne is a cherry that I read about 10, 11 years ago that was doing very well down in the Lodi Valley of California. And went down and took a look at that cherry and some other cherries. And boy, it was a winner. Big, beautiful cherry. Just absolutely gorgeous cherry. Doesn't really have a tendency to split. Doesn't get soft. It really checks all the boxes. It's on the early side. Just a marvelous, wonderful cherry. I wish I had about 100 more acres of them. I really like that cherry. It's a good eating cherry. I don't know about pies or that sort of thing. I suspect it would be pretty good. But yeah, I had 3 of them in my backyard. I love the coral champagne, and its partner, a tree that goes along with it, was kind of out of the same program, is the black pearl that you've heard talk about. Another cherry that's out of California that's an absolutely beautiful cherry. They call it black pearl because it's really round and almost a black color. Just a gorgeous cherry. Jimmy Clepton. I have a question. If you remember, I was telling you we had a hard freeze and we lost apricots and sugar plums, Stanley plums, half our peach, but our apple trees maybe lost 35 to 40%. But the apple trees are reblossoming, like 30 to 35% of new blooms. What do you think they will do? It's still early in the season for them to mature. Boy, if you get more than about a week or 2 weeks at the most outside of your normal bloom period, it's going to be too late for that fruit to set. It'll end up either aborting or being a dwarf fruit or being misshapen. It probably won't get seeds. I suspect that I wouldn't count on that fruit. Let me put it like that. We have a lot of cherries like that every single year where the bloom period lasts about a week and a half, and a lot of times those later blooms that'll set, there'll be a small cherry, you'll get your hopes up, and most of the time those don't set. So I wouldn't count on those. I would count on the earlier ones that are growing and those set. Maybe you can set some doubles out there. Maybe hang some doubles and try to make up for that crop. I've salvaged a crop out of blocks before that had 40% of the fruit still out there just by doubling up on that fruit and leaving more maybe in some areas where otherwise you maybe wouldn't leave some fruit. So I hope that works out for you, Jimmy. I hate to hear about people going through frost and freezes. I've been hearing about some people back east going through a hard time this last week, and we're sorry to hear about that. Soqueen Mushtaq here in Kashmir, our experts cut the central leader every year. I'm talking about Gala on M9. Cut the central leader every year. Boy, I can't imagine why you do that. Boy, I'd sure love to see a picture about that so I get a better sense of what you're talking about. Gala on M9, they cut the central leader every year. Yeah, I'd like to know more about that, but I can't imagine why you do that. Huh. I don't know if they're notching it to get breaks or I'm sorry, I'm just a little unclear on that. Um, Tony, oh, Tony, hey, I know Tony. Welcome, Tony. Nice to have you on board. And Larry's on board, so welcome. Nice to have you here. Let's see. Elroy Jetson says, curious what gauge wires typically used. On the anchors, I kind of gone to cables, but a lot of guys still use 10 gauge wire on that. It's real soft and pliable, and you can bend it around. So a lot of guys are using the 10 gauge wire on the anchors. I prefer cable, just like 3/8 inch cable. You only have to run one cable, in some cases two. The wires, you usually want to run several more than that to hold the anchors down. The wires that run down the rows, whether you're doing 7 or 8 wires, that's 12 gauge wire. So 12 gauge on the rows, 10 gauge on the anchors. Andre Petruska says, greetings from Romania. Wow, that's great. Maybe you can touch the subject of resumes accumulated in the soil from copper-based fungicides. We really went through this in the 50s and 60s and 70s. My grandpa and his grandpa and my dad, they sprayed copper on everything. Copper was the solution to everything back in the day. Let me go on here. Fungicides that we need to apply from late autumn until spring in our climate. Otherwise, we have no chance with growing apricot, peach, nectarine, cherry. Maybe talk about new, more efficient copper-based products that require less copper percentage per acre. Thanks in advance. Boy, even when I first started managing corporate farms years and years ago, we were still using quite a bit of copper. We'd paint the cherry trees with copper. We'd paint all the wounds on the cherries with copper, and we'd spray copper for everything, for bugs and for mildew and for fire blight. Copper for everything. It didn't matter. And the cherries, before you go into the fall, just for the heck of it, go out there and put another copper on them. I can relate. The result of that now is there's been studies here in Washington State, I think just over the course of the last 2, 3, 4 years, we're learning that we've really developed a resistance to copper. So I hear you. I hear what you're talking about. This has become an issue for us too in fighting problems, such as bacterial canker in cherries. That the copper is just not working anymore, and we're have to move away from it. New tools. You're asking about new tools. We've got a ways to go to learn ourselves, but a couple of things that we're doing is in some cases we're moving to lime sulfur. We're learning how to use lime sulfur for mildew control and then maybe some pest control. Lime sulfur plays a part in that, but also Cassumin. Cassumin is a new product that's kind of come online, and it's helped kind of take the pressure off some of those bacteria that are coming along. So those are a couple that we're kind of turning to, but we're just learning our way through it too. But I do understand the issue of resistance and needing to pull away from some of those, and so I would say just be judicious and look into Cassumin, look into more lime sulfurs. Lime sulfur is a safe product, and boy, it has a lot of great functions. Might be able to help you out here a little bit. So be interesting to see how that turns out. Kyle says, for organic, how late, and he says petal fall in parentheses, question mark, do you rely on lime sulfur versus tools like jibs or ABA? Yeah, I stopped using lime sulfur when marking becomes a concern, and that's usually, like you say, right about petal fall. Maybe even full bloom, some varieties like Envy and Pink Ladies, Fuji's, some varieties that have a tendency to mark a little more or rust a little more, even if they're just even around a little bit of wetness. We try back away from the lime sulfur as soon as we start getting close to full bloom. But in most cases, I would say by petal fall, we've already moved away from lime sulfur just because of the issue of marking. That's all I've got here, Martin. Do you have some questions? Oh, yeah, got a whole stack of them there. All right, nice to know that we have people online tonight. Atif Assad says, hi, any booklet available which a new beginner can use for apple orchard management? Honey, can you reach right behind you there on the bottom shelf? There's a book down there. It's called High Intensity Orchard Management. Do you see that down there on the bottom shelf? This is a great question. And you see that down there on the bottom shelf? Okay. I'm going to find that for you in a minute. I know I have that book, and I know because I've had that on my desk or my bookshelf for the last 40 years. I've had that book, and it was written by a gentleman here in Washington State years ago, and it is called High Intensity Orchard Management. I would recommend that book to anybody listening here today. That is a great book to get you started out in these high intensity, V trellis, vertical trellis type systems. I would definitely recommend that book, but also your local extension agent. Our extension agency here in Washington State, like the Prosser Research Station, they have all kinds of great materials that they put out all of the time. And even crop production manuals. They'll put out a crop production manual every year that will give you the recommended spray to spray for everything at every timing. I mean, it really breaks it down for you. So if you're looking for very specific recommendations, I would advise reaching out to the Prosser Research Station here. If you're growing apples or cherries or other tree fruits, they're a great resource. You might have to pay $5, $6, $7 for those, but I'll see if I can lay my hands on one of those. I usually keep one of those on my desk out at the orchard. But yeah, those crop production manuals that come out from the research station, but also this book called High Intensity Orchard Management. We're going to post that on the page for you later. I'm gonna make a point of doing that. Saqlain Mushtaq says, hi from Kashmir. The primary issue here is the fruit retention in traditional delicious apple orchards. We have massive trees, but with less fruit set. We do use PGRs. The temperature rises, fruit fall starts, when it gets hot. It's just, boy, that's tough. The fruit set, yeah. So that's the issue there, the heat. And, it's probably the combination of heat, maybe wind drying out that pollen. We get real hot days during that pollen set. That can be a real issue. So some of the things that we've moved to, I know Matt Whiting has done some research here at the research station with special sprayers that they use, pneumatic sprayers that they use to spray pollen onto the trees. You can try that. We blow pollen on with four-wheelers and fans. We do that, and you might be able to time that during night when it's cooler. It might have a more beneficial effect. We also rent bees and put inserts at the edge of the hive so that there's additional pollen for the trees. But fruit set, it comes back down to a pollination issue, pollinator issue, but actually making sure that not only are they pollinized, but that pollen makes its way down the tube. It's just like any other problem. You have to troubleshoot that and just start at the beginning of the problem and kind of work yourself through all those factors that we've talked about and find out what the missing link is. If I can help you more, please let me know. Juan Santa Cruz is on board. Welcome, Juan. Evan Witter says, in one of your recent videos, you mentioned putting down 5 ton of compost at planting. Is that a certain type? We're a chicken farmer and apply composted manure this year. Should this be a regular practice or every other year? That's a great question. So yeah, let me get a little more specific on that. I think I said I put down 5 tons per acre on new plantings. That's not entirely true. On new plantings, I put down 15 tons per acre and I broadcast it across the entire field. So on new plantings, I always put down 15 tons per acre of compost to get some of that organic matter into the soil and build that soil up and get the nutritional value. If I already have a block planted, especially in our organic blocks, but even conventional blocks, we'll use compost and chicken manure and blood meal. We use all of the above. What I'll typically do is I'll do 5 tons per acre of compost, and generally this is organic blocks. So we want to make sure that we have a product. What kind of compost? To answer your question, a good compost that's been composted and is Omni approved. We want to have something that's going to work into our organic program and that has already been specifically approved for use by Omni. That's very, very important. So On a planted block, I would do 5 tons per acre of compost, a good Omni approved compost, and then I would run a Wonder Weeder or some sort of tillage machine to till that into the soil. Every other year, I would rotate that with chicken manure or blood meal or chicken meal, chicken feathers, this sort of thing. We love those chicken meal products. They have a lot of potassium and good stuff in those. So I like the idea of alternating those. So organic single year. I alternate between compost and feather meal, compost, feather meal, like that. New planting, 15 tons per acre, broadcast over the entire block. YouTube, the U-Babe. Is that right? Did I get that right? How to make a good fertilization plan for the apple orchard. Please explain. I'm sick how much I use and with which one. Okay. Did I get that right? How to make a good fertilization plan for the apple orchard. Okay. My fertilization plan, if I'm trying to grow a tree to the top wire, is to take a look at my soil, see what it is that I'm missing. Typically, when I'm growing a new tree, I want to have nitrogen. I want to have N, P, and K. Those are the building blocks, and I want to make sure that I have those. Typically, I'll have anywhere from 30 to 70 pounds of N in a fertigation mix. Generally around in that 30-pound range. P probably 50 pounds. And K somewhere around 50 pounds, and that's just because of the cost. I'd like to have more, but they cost so much money. But I'll generally do something like 30 N, 30 P, 50 K, something like that. And then I might put sulfur or some calcium or whatever in the mix also. That's an expensive mix. That's almost like a mix that you would buy at the garden center for a Miracle-Gro mix or something like that. A good mix that mixes well together and is blended well together, and I fertigate that twice a week. And probably somewhere in the neighborhood of, in those applications, I'm putting on 8 pounds per application for a total of 16 pounds of N per week plus the P and the K that's in the mix. I'll do that for 3 or 4 weeks. And just because it's so expensive, after 3 or 4 weeks, I'll begin to move away from those and I'll go to N products. I would use a UN32. You can find those in bulk and you can buy those pretty cheap. Or a Can 17 or a CN9. Pick your favorite N mix that's compatible with your soil, whether you need calcium or you don't need calcium nitrate. There's a lot of those N mixes that can get a lot of N into your soil. And so initially I would do the mix, and after that I would just go to those nitrogen sources and just pump those into the system all the way up until, in our area, the mid-July, summer solstice. I don't like to go any later than that because I don't want too much nitrogen in the system. It'll cause those trees to freeze when we get into November if we get a good freeze. No Heat Bag is on board. Welcome. It's fertilization plan. I hope that helps. Twice a week, 16 to 20 pounds of N. Jerry Singh, Facebook said, what moisture probe do you recommend? I don't know what our electric probes that we have out there is. I'll see if I can find one of those. We use a company called Phytech that provides the probes and puts those out there for us. We're working on building our own system right now. I can find out what that is, but my favorite probe is the hand probe. That's just the hand probe that you can buy down at the farm supply store that you can take and stick into the ground, 1 foot, pull it out, look at that, and then stick it back in the same hole so that you're drilling back down into that 2nd foot. My favorite probe is a hand probe where you can actually look at the dirt and experience it with your own hands. Gagan Deep says, hello, sir. We're looking at 2,500 trees per hectare for new blocks. Which one should we go for, M9 or 202? Boy, that's a good question. I haven't had great luck with 202, but I don't know your area. Where are you? Let's see. Do you know where Gagan is from? I don't know where you're from, so it's hard to say. But since you're speaking in terms of hectare, my guess is he's probably, New Zealand, Australia, somewhere that speaks in terms of hectare. For me, here, if I had to choose between an M9 and a 202, I'd go with an M9 every time. But for your situation, I really don't know. The only 202s I have is about a 5-acre block of 202s on Honeycrisp. I haven't really been happy with those, but I don't want to make an anecdotal case out of 5 acres to talk about all 202s. They may do great in your area. Just haven't worked in the area that I put them in. If I had to choose, I would pick an M9 just because I've had a lot of luck with M9. It's a great root. I've had good success with it. Scott Hassel says, biggest struggle not only is it the biggest struggle, it's the most important thing. Crop load is so important. Years ago, it's been, 10, 12 years ago, we made the transition from to going to bud counts, to counting every single bud at the pruning season, at the thinning season, and all the way through. We'll count 4, 5, 6 times. We'll count buds so that we know what our crop load is, and we've got pretty good at predicting how many bins per acre we're going to pick out of a block by monitoring that and following that all throughout the year. There's a lot of new technologies that are coming out now that hopefully at some point they're going to get mastered and they're going to do that work for us. Crop load is very important, Scott, but it's worth putting the time into. At the end of the day, customers, generally looking for, the same. It's not like we have, on galas we have 10 spaces in the grocery store anymore for galas. We don't. We have one, maybe two if we're lucky, and they buy one size. So we really need to try to grow those apples to that size that the customer base is looking for. And the way we do that is crop load. So it's very important to be predictable, getting the right size, for getting return, and for knowing how much crop you're going to have in the barn at the end of the year. It's very, very important. Crop load's important. It's also very important on varieties like Honeycrisp. One of the biggest struggles with bitter pit on Honeycrisp is crop load. If you don't get that crop load nailed down, in other words, if you have way too heavy a crop, or even worse, a very light crop, chances are in a bitter pit environment, you're going to struggle with bitter pit. So I feel for you. Crop load's important. Keep following the page. Almost everything we talk about, we're talking about crop load because it is that important. So please stay tuned. We're going to continue talking about that. Gene Thompson, greatest struggle on Blossom Freezer. Blossom Freeze. Greatest struggle on Blossom Freeze. Well, the greatest struggle I ever had on Blossom Freeze, and I assume you're talking about frost. Greatest struggle I ever had was 3 years ago. It snowed in the middle of May and snowed in the blooms. Actually, in the middle of April, and snowed in the blooms. And boy, that really hurt us for about 2 or 3 years. But the greatest struggle on Blossom Freeze is the polar events that we get. These polar events where it dips down in the close to 0 degrees, and you get that cold coming out of the north. Those are really hard to deal with. But beyond that, just your normal spring weather, we've adapted and got pretty good at protecting that fruit up to about 3, 4, 5, 6 degrees. So freeze is a major concern. I'm hoping it was cold last night, but I'm hoping we're out of the woods by now. Amandeep Singh Brower says, we are in Grand Forks, BC. Can you tell me about the spray we need to do on apples, please? Oh, that's a big one. We're going to be talking about the sprays every week, kind of as we go through the season here. Again, I would encourage you to reach out to the Prosser Research Station down here and get a crop protection manual. I don't really make spray recommendations on this channel here. We'll talk about products that are successful and that work for us and that I'm really happy with. I don't really give rates and talk about recommendations, but reach out to the Prosser Research Station down here. They have crop protection manuals that have all of that throughout the entire year. It's a great resource, and I think it'll do you a lot of good. Alberto Martins, nice to have you on board. Brett Howerton says, cool info on the girdling and scoring. Does that work for blackberries? I do not know. Boy, I don't know if that works on blackberries. I have grown some blackberries, but I have never tried girdling or scoring on those. I've seen blackberries grown on trellis systems, just like the apples, just right down the road from us here. But I do not know the answer to that. I suspect it would, but I've never done it. Diraj Thakur says, tell me a solution, please, for grass weed. Boy, what is the product for that? Like crack grass, water grass. There's sprays for that. Again, one of these crop protection manuals will tell you the right product for that. I'm not thinking of it right offhand. But there are specific herbicides that will get grass weeds, whether it's quack grass or water grass. There's very specific products that will get those. It's not coming to me offhand. I would encourage you on the page. I know there's people on this page that have a lot more experience with that than I do, so feel free to chime in if you have the answer to that, what that product is. There's a couple really good ones out there that we've used in areas where you get just too much water built up and you'll tend to get crack grass or water grass. And it spreads like crazy, so you want to get out there and get that killed. Leisha Lind, on pulling limbs, does this work for cherries? I assume she's talking about the suckers we were talking about pulling in the pears. Absolutely. It works really well on cherries. Same thing. Just Thank you. That's good tea. Same thing. Just get right up inside that tree. Usually those older trees are open base trees, and those suckers grow right up on the backside of those. So yeah, those suckers start growing out before they harden off and get woody. Just get in there and pull those out of there. The only caution I would say is be careful doing that on the outside of the tree because if you get too carried away, it's just like any sort of summer pruning that you do. You might end up cutting some of those suckers that you want to leave for a nice renewal branch. So just be aware of if you need any lower branches that you want to pull down and leave so you maintain that structure. Be careful you don't pull them out all out. Be selective about leaving a few in there. Nitish Kameta, G41 or G11? M9 for production, please. Which one do you prefer? Well, out of G41, G11, or M9, I prefer Geneva 41, probably just because I have a lot more experience with it. I think G11 has been a little harder to get a hold of, and there's been a lot of G41s out there on the market, and so we bought a lot of them over the years, and I don't know, I'm farmed quite a few acres on Geneva 41. Probably only have 200 or 300 acres on G11, but they're very, very similar. I mean, you can hardly tell the difference. I did have a block of pink ladies. I think I've mentioned before that we went into that block and pulled flowers out of that block, but we didn't get the whole block pulled, and we got fire blight in some of those flowers, and we had it and part of the block was Geneva 11, part of the block was Geneva 41, and I thought there was less fire blight in the Geneva 11 than there were in the Geneva 41. So you could make the case that it was just a little bit more resistant to the fire blight than the 41, but I don't know. That's anecdotal in a very small block, and it was just from my eyes kind of making a judgment call. But out of G41, G11, or an M9, for production purposes, fruit coming back every year, good bud density, resistance to fire blight, good growth, good horsepower for getting that tree up to the top, yet it doesn't alternate for a whole host of reasons. I like both of those, Geneva 41 or Geneva 11. I like M9 too. I've just kind of moved away from it just because of the fire blight resistance and some of these other rootstocks. Luke Grigor, I'm having a hard time, Grigorjek. You'll know who you are. Any idea how to avoid such an amount of twin plums? I don't. One of the things that will happen to us in cherries is if we get a real hot summer, we'll get what we call sutures or we'll get doubles. And that's a result of at cell division in the real hot peak time of the summertime, that heat is just too much for them at cell division, and it'll throw off doubles. And you'll end up with these ugly sutures and doubles the next year. What can you do about it? On those varieties that are sensitive to that, it could very well work on plums too. We spray Surround on those, that kale and product Surround during that peak hot period, and it seems to help quite a bit. The areas where we haven't done that, we've really struggled. So I would try that. Try this product called Surround during that real peak hot period during cell division. See if that doesn't help you a little bit. What do we got? One more. Saklan Mushtak, best variety out there according to you. Best variety out there according to me is the Cosmic Crisp. Fortunately, we have that apple only here in Washington State, and I think a judgment came down just last week where it was released that at least for a few more years, that's going to be exclusive to Washington State. We're grateful for that because, frankly, we've got major investment into that apple, and it was grown and produced and developed right here at our very own research station, 5 miles from my home right here. It took them 20 years to develop that apple. And for me, I think it's the most superior apple on the planet. If you cut that apple open and you lay it open, where other apples will brown, that apple will stay white and it'll stay fresh. It has great pressures. The window for harvesting that apple is long, and it's a really good apple to pick and to harvest. What I really love about it, it's grower friendly. Anybody can grow that apple, and you can really get some good high production, real consistent apple quality. Like almost every Cosmic Crisp that you eat is going to taste just like the last one that you ate. Very consistent apple. Maybe I have a preference to it, but I'm invested in the apple as many people are in Washington State. I think it's a great apple. Another great apple. There's some great club variety apples out there. One of the apples that that we're farming is an Envy apple out of New Zealand. That's a wonderful apple. That's a great apple. Pretty grower friendly, likes to get really big and have great bud density and grow a lot of fruit. That's another great apple. That's a good example of a club variety apple, Inns apple. Schroll Sahab says, I have Colt rootstock grafted with Stakalb and Hendelfingen cherry varieties, but the production is low. I'm going to be honest with you, Schroll. That Colt rootstock is not a very good rootstock. I hate to tell you that. We've struggled with that rootstock in Washington State, and you'd be hard pressed to find many of those out here anymore. It just is so inconsistent. It can. We thought that was going to be a precocious rootstock out of the gate, but it's just really struggled with low tonnages, 2-3 tons per acre, just not enough to pay the bills. Get you some Geisler rootstocks. That's my best advice to you. And if you have a Colt, and that's what you have to work with, I understand that. Sometimes that's what we have, and that's what we have to work with. Try Retain. Retain is a product that you can put on there. About this time of year that will help with return. There are some tools out there that can maybe help you get a little better return on that. A lot of pollinizers, a lot of bees. Double up on your bees, but it's tough. It's kind of the nature of that rootstock that it can be tough. I've grown a lot of them, and right now I have 0 of them, and that's on purpose. And I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to be real with you. Really moved away from Colt rootstocks, and I probably won't plant any cherry rootstock unless it's a Geisler. So yeah, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I'm just not a real fan of Colt rootstocks. I think you'd be hard pressed to find many people at least here in the state of Washington, that are still growing on Colt rootstock. But if that's all you have, that's what you have. Do we have anything else, Eddie? She's writing something there. Okay. Marlon says, yes. Thank you to the subscribers. Thank you for the people that are on the school. We don't make any money off of those things. It's kind of a library. It's a category where we take the short reels that people really like, the little short reels, but we give you the full version of those. You can find those. You can find those on the YouTube. You can find them on the school. We appreciate you subscribing and pushing the follow button. It's a big help to us. Like I say, I don't do this. I don't get paid for this. This is just for because I want to leave a legacy. I want to pass on what I've learned to other people and help other people to learn how to grow big, beautiful fruit. And I hope it's a help to you. We'll continue to do it as long as you're on board and willing to listen. So great group tonight. Thank you, and see you out in the field. Thanks.